Heaven sent.
Picture this. It's a Friday night. You've got a fresh 20 in your pocket and nothing but time. So what better way to kick off an incredible weekend than by calling up a couple of friends and heading down to your local arcade? If you ask me, it doesn't get much better than that. Beginning to do so in present day is a much different story. With the rise in console gaming, internet, and an overall struggle to fund such operations, the presence of arcades are becoming more and more scarce with each passing year. What was once a setting for many celebrations of our youth have now become the ghost of our past. And for those like myself who had found their passion for gaming in these neon-soaked spaces, it really hurts to see how far they've fallen throughout time. So in this video, I thought it'd be great to revisit some of the early 2000s greatest arcade games, as well as a handful of iconic locations that are no longer with us. So if you're ready for a hefty dose of early 2000s nostalgia, make sure to bring plenty of quarters, and join us on a trip down memory lane as we explore the forgotten arcades of the early 2000s. While we are mainly here to discuss arcade gaming in the late 90s and early 2000s, I still find it important that we touch on a brief history of arcades and how they came to evolve into their present day form. You see, there was once a time where arcades were nothing more than a couple of skee-ball machines. And even stranger than that, pinball was banned from many arcades at one point due to it being deemed a game of chance. It obviously made a glorious comeback just some decades later, and as its following strengthened, so did the interest in developers to create an even more advanced experience for future arcade goers. The first official arcade game to be released commercially came in the form of Computer Space, a 1971 space shooter in which you would essentially battle it out between a pair of flying saucers. Many celebrated classics such as Pac-Man and Space Invaders came soon after, beginning what is known to many as the golden age of arcade gaming. The demand for all things joystick related began to skyrocket, with thousands of enthusiasts from all shapes, sizes, and walks of life flooding into arcades all over the world. With increasing demand came an influx of arcades opening up on nearly every block. You know how there's a mattress firm on like every corner? Yeah, that's kind of how arcades were back in the 80s. But with the market now becoming far too saturated, the industry was well aware that the downfall was soon to come. The media began to crack down on the impacts of gaming in children, stating the addictive or violent nature of certain titles, becoming a cause for concern for many parents, which in turn made them less likely to bring their kids to an arcade, which in the end damaged the market. Now, one of the primary developers for arcade gaming at that time were Sega, in which then president had stated he was confident this decline wouldn't last. He believed that a quality game couldn't go unnoticed and would have to do well. So as long as developers were doing their part in advancing the technical specs of their cabinets and improving the experience, the players just wouldn't be able to help themselves. And safe to say, he was correct on that. The arcade industry was recovering well from the mid-80s into the early 90s, and the games themselves were reaching new technical heights. With many games now making use of 3D polygons, the experience was more elevated than ever before. And if they thought this was crazy, I can only imagine what they thought about the 90s. A newfound trend in arcade gaming was afoot as the love for button-mashing chaos began to bloom in the form of fighting games. From Street Fighter II, Mortal Kombat, and my personal favorite, Tekken, the competitive nature and all-out fun that could be had with fighting games felt endless, and it even began to garner some serious recognition in the form of competitions. By 1993, arcade gaming had generated an annual revenue of $7 billion, which was actually greater than both the home console and film markets at that time. Safe to say, arcade games were kicking some serious butt, and while its craze began to blossom all over again, its most evolutionary of times were right around the corner. And so with that, let's revisit some of the greatest arcade titles of that time, starting with the beloved category of light gun shooters. There's nothing quite like the atmosphere of an old school arcade. Walking into the smell of cheap pizza and salty snacks, glow-in-the-dark carpets, and hundreds of bustling game cabinets. It's truly a sight to behold. Now, I'm a lover of all things an arcade has to offer, But the first thing I do to get my reflexes sharp and fingers nice and warm is hop on a light gun game. Going back to the NES days of Duck Hunt, light gun shooters have been around since the mid-80s, but their presence in the arcade scene quickly began to sweep the industry. From movie licensed shooters such as Alien or The Terminator, to the extraterrestrial carnage of Area 51, light gun shooters were really beginning to make a name for themselves in the 90s, but a specific three will always reign supreme in my personal list of favorites. Starting in order of release, let's begin with Time Crisis. Time Crisis had made its first appearance in arcades on December of 1995. Making use of a cover system paired with time-sensitive objectives, Time Crisis had quickly become a favorite for light gun enthusiasts due to its intense gunplay. The cover mechanic was an especially unique touch, giving players more immersion in their firefights. It was a fluid way to reload your weapons. Some of my fondest memories of arcades were spent in the presence of this incredible game. Some cabinets even had a blowback feature on their pistols, further heightening the immersion. As you can imagine, its debut success led to a litany of sequels and spin-offs, not to mention a slew of other inspired titles from separate developers. And while our next game of discussion may or may not have been inspired by the likes of the Time Crisis series, it's without a doubt that it's equally as legendary. The House of the Dead. And just one look at this beautifully designed cabinet is more than enough to send me into a nostalgia spiral. What can I say? I mean, you've got cheesy B-movie cinematics, memorable dialogue, and some of the creepiest zombies that gaming had to offer. The House of the Dead is an arcade experience I've cherished for decades at this point, and it's no secret that I'm not the only one. Developed by the video game giant Sega, the very first House of the Dead game was released on September 13th, 1996. Combining fast-paced gunplay and hilarious dialogue, it was like being a part of your own cheesy horror film, and I honestly couldn't get enough of it as a kid. I was lucky enough to have a House of the Dead machine at my local Dave & Buster's, and while all the other kids were busy on the ticket games, I was far too invested in getting a perfect score on each level to ever join them. The boss fights were very unforgiving, but it was a lot of fun getting to learn their patterns and develop strategies on how to defeat them. The House of the Dead series is often cited for being responsible in the early 2000s zombie craze, alongside Resident Evil of course. But if there's one thing that separates this series from the pack, it's in its unexplainable charm. It could just be my own personal nostalgia, but there's just something about this series that has it all for me. I mean, I still play it to this day. So if you ever need someone to school you on the secret health packs found on each level, I'm definitely your guy. But these two series weren't the only ones holding my interest in the realms of light gun shooters, as this next one is by far the most creative. So let's zoom in for a closer look, shall we? Have you ever wondered what it'd be like to travel the world as a highly trained sniper? Well, in the 1999 Konami classic of Silent Scope, this dream officially came to be. Making use of a mounted light gun with an interactive scope that zooms into the battlefield, the immersion of popping virtual skulls had never felt more real. Whereas most light gun shooters of this time would overwhelm you with the barrage of enemies on screen, Silent Scope took a much more calculated approach, as it wasn't all about dumping magazines, as it was more so about placing accurate and lethal shots to your target. Each mission would typically include some type of hostage rescue, in which players are expected to eliminate all threats within a timely manner. This won't come easy though, with many enemies either using hostages as human shields, or placing themselves in hidden cover. But if you're crafty enough, you can see your way to a mission success, and even scope out some hotties along the way. How you doing? It's really hard to put into words the experience of these games without getting to play them for yourself, but for those who have, you already know just how immersive it can be. Much like how console gaming was experimental in the golden ages of 5th and 6th gen gaming, much can be said about the arcade games. The Silent Scope was a huge testament to that statement. But it wasn't just about shooting in the crowded cabinets of the early 2000s. Of course not, as there were plenty of other great genres to explore. So how about we rev up our engines and get ready for some serious speed, as we revisit some of the arcade's greatest racers. I may be going out on a limb by saying this, but if it weren't for my local arcade, I probably would have never passed my driving test. given the fact that I had already driven around the world by the tender age of 12 years old. What, you don't believe me? You probably never got a chance to experience one of the greatest arcade racers of the late 90s, that being Midway's Cruisin' World. Being the sequel to the infamous Cruisin' USA, Cruisin' World decided to up the ante in terms of over-the-top mayhem, with the welcome addition of stunts, as well as an impressive catalog of tracks and locales. From Japan, France, or the hell on earth that is better known as Florida, you'll speed your way around the world going up against time limits and pulling off insane stunts for a much needed speed boost. Now this may come as a surprise to some of you younger folk, but back in the glorious days of the late 90s, some Walmarts would actually have a nice little arcade setup by the entrance. I know, crazy right? Now it's just a place to get cheap candles and physically assaulted. Anyways, my local Walmart had a really nice Cruisin' World cabinet set up at the front, and as you can imagine, my mom pretty much used that as my babysitter. The gameplay was so addicting. I literally pumped enough quarters into this thing to fund a community college basketball team. And the soundtrack, my word, it hits you with that, you've got speed, you've got the power to cruise the world. I'm getting hyped just thinking about it. This game beautifully encapsulated the spirit of the 90s in such a great way. And if you're able to find one of these glorious cabinets at an arcade near you, definitely go for a few laps. But before I get too far off the rails in the world of cruising, I think we should move on to what may have been my most played arcade racer of all. So get ready to spike up your hair in pure excitement and pop in your favorite Offspring album. We've got some fares to collect. The role of a taxi driver in Western media has typically found itself to be less than glamorous. I mean, Travis Bickle isn't exactly what I would call the poster child of optimism. But that's not to say that all hope is lost for a video game depicting this much needed service. Developed by the Japanese talented Hitmaker and published by Sega, the world was first introduced to the wacky world of Crazy Taxi in February of 1999. In this game, you take on the role of a taxi driver, in which you are given the choice between several different characters with their own set vehicle to use. You set out in a fictional world with a strong likeness to that of San Fran, and begin picking up patrons that most likely should have left their house at least 10 minutes earlier. I say that because you will be given next to no time to get your customer from point A to B. So if that means taking your late 80s convertible on a grass-stained ride through a public park or ramping off the back of a car carrier, so be it. The sheer difficulty is of course welcome, as the overall control and speed of your vehicle is very much up to par with what is needed to make this game so exciting. And back at a time when every credit to play was going to cost you a few quarters, you wanted to milk your gameplay for as long as possible. With Crazy Taxi, you could play all night, just as long as you kept up with the game's sometimes unforgiving objectives. Nonetheless, the formula was incredibly addicting, and pairing that with the game's irresistible charm and licensed soundtrack made this into an experience that will forever be burned into my nerdgasm spank bank. Crazy Taxi, to me, is the epitome of classic arcade racing. While it may not be your standard first, second, third place type of racing, the energy behind this game as well as the time-based objectives just made it all so addicting. And that's not to disparage any of the other great racers that were found at this time. I just personally like Crazy Taxi the most. But there were honestly so many other great games to get behind the wheel of back then. I mean, you had Hydro Thunder, 500 GP, the Fast and Furious game, I mean the list goes on. But how about we take things back to what may have been the reasoning behind the arcade's great resurgence, that being the fighting games. While our previous topics of both light gun shooters and arcade racers were definite cause for praise in the Y2K era of gaming, nothing could bring an arcade full of enthusiasts together quite like the rush of some competitive fighting action. With the success of fighters such as Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter II, arcades have once again began their rise to popularity. And when I say they were popular, I mean it. People used to literally huddle around these fighting cabinets, watching and cheering on for those playing. And while the mechanics of a fighter may seem a bit simplified to a casual player, for those willing to take the time and learn the ins and outs of these complex mechanics, could take their talents to even greater heights. The rise in competitive gaming was afoot, and the best players of these celebrated titles were now able to showcase their skills on a platform for hundreds, even thousands to see. And win or lose, it was an incredible experience just to be a part of such an energetic atmosphere for gamers. But all that aside, there were three personal titles that meant the most to me in this era of gaming, as they were my primary introduction into the world of fighting games, and the first one being none other than Killer Instinct. Now this is a game that I find to be highly underrated, as its buzz sort of fizzled out as time passed, but for those who were able to witness the game in its heyday, it's certainly one of the more memorable fighters from that era. The plot is interesting enough, in which a powerful mega corporation known as Ultratech organizes a tournament called Killer Instinct. Along with regular participants, experimental creatures created by Ultratech also fight in the tournament so their strengths can be tested. And this broad range of unique looking characters is exactly what had gotten me interested in the first place. The gameplay itself was quite unique as well, making use of a double health bar and only one round to fight. The combos themselves were automated, and the addition of a finishing move called No Mercy were very much appreciated by fans of the Mortal Kombat series. The visuals were chock full of that nostalgic CGI look, and Falgor was easily one of the coolest fighting game characters I had ever seen. It was a really sick game that I feel deserves more appreciation, especially considering that the 2013 remake sorta flopped. That's only a taste of what arcade fighting had to offer at that time, as the next game on our list is by far my personal favorite. So with that, let's take a trip back to my childhood pizza parlor and revisit one of my favorite fighting games of all time, Tekken 3. Now I don't have to be the one to tell you that everything is better with pizza, but back in the wonderful year of 1999, at the ripe young age of 6 years old, I had quickly discovered that pizza is always better with Tekken. This is a game that truly rocked my world as a youth, and if I could get back all the quarters I had dumped into playing it, I could probably buy an actual cabinet of it for myself. The electric soundtrack, beautifully designed characters, and those oh so lovable CGI cutscenes, Tekken 3 was the epitome of fighting action, and even in present day, this game still stands the test of time. Plus that feeling of laying eyes on Jin Kazama for the first time, I mean, come on. It had that lovable edge that was so prevalent in games of the late 90s, and each character was officially looking their best. The combat itself was presented in greater form than ever before, and not to mention the addition of three-dimensional movement, also known as sidestepping, just made the fighting that much more fluid. Tekken is a series that speaks for itself, and in the realms of its arcade roots, I personally gotta give my flowers to Tekken 3 for really showcasing its nature. But taking all my personal feelings aside, I would be remiss if I didn't mention quite possibly one of the most celebrated arcade fighters in history. And in this one, teamwork definitely makes the dream work. So without any further rambling, let's get into some Marvel vs. Capcom 2. The world of gaming has never been shy to the idea of a crossover, but it's hard to find one that has made more of an impact than the Marvel vs. Capcom series. First beginning in 1993 as a crossover of X-Men vs. Street Fighter, the concept of taking the beloved combat stylings of Street Fighter and tying it all together with some fluid tag team mechanics made this game an easy favorite for any button-mashing maniac of the early 90s. They later decided to capitalize on the success of this concept, further expanding the roster of characters into a deeper realm of the Marvel Universe. Also adding in the feature of assist moves, which would allow two of your selected characters to work together in performing a special attack. For anyone who knows the satisfying side of such attacks, you can understand why it elevated this series so greatly. It was everything that fighting game fanatics could ever ask for. The addicting combat mechanics of a Street Fighter game mixed with a huge roster of characters from two separate yet beloved franchises. Safe to say, the game did very well for itself, and the shareholders at both Marvel and Capcom were more than eager to keep this gravy train a-rolling. So for their next trick, they released the legendary title of Marvel vs. Capcom 2, and for this one, they decided to more than double the roster of characters, as well as change the combat model from a 2v2 battle to a 3v3. Now you want to talk about on-screen chaos. This game was it, but it all worked together in such a beautiful way that it's no surprise it blew up the way that it did. They simplified the controls in a way that welcomed newcomers, but were still enjoyable to veterans alike. MVC2 was also the first game in the series to make use of three-dimensional backgrounds, which, coupling that with the beautiful 2D sprites of the characters, gave this game the iconic look that still holds up in present day. And given the fact that the game was also released on the Sega Dreamcast, they also included a feature in which you could swap playable characters from the Dreamcast to the arcade version, which for me, I'm a pure sucker for that kind of stuff. So we have covered the trigger-happy mayhem of a light gun shooter, cruised around the world in arcade racing, and covered the button-mashing prowess of fighting games. So what's left? Well, there's plenty more love to go around in the unique roster of games from that era, but these three in particular really stood out among the rest for me. Going back into the memories of my childhood, one of my favorite moments in gaming was spent at an arcade known as Wonder Park. This massive playground/arcade was located at the now defunct Cincinnati Mills Mall, and I remember spending an entire evening with my buddy Brandon on the Sega sit-down shooter of Ocean Hunter. In this game you played the role of an underwater bounty hunter, in which you would hunt down a variety of giant sea creatures and collect their bounties by defeating them. Most of the creatures were inspired by famous mythological beasts and made for some of the most exhilarating boss battles I've ever experienced. You would traverse through sunken ships, explore underwater temples, and swim your way through an impressive variety of underwater locales, all of which were absolutely stunning. It had that Sega Blue Skies kind of vibe to it, and the gameplay was equally satisfying. It was actually the first game that I had ever completed at an arcade, which is telling, considering it probably cost us a fortune to complete in one sitting. But that wasn't the only game I had my eye on that day. As y'all know about me, I'm a big fan of extreme sports, so when I got my first look at Top Skater, you already know I had to jump in and give it a play. Funnily enough, this game was actually a huge inspiration for the team at Neversoft in the creation of the very first Tony Hawk game. It was stated that during their lunch breaks, they would often hang out at a local bowling alley near their studio. In the bowling alley's arcade was a Top Skater cabinet, which they would typically be found taking turns and making notes of what they enjoyed about the game's mechanics. While Top Skater is a very different experience from the Tony Hawk games, it's easily one of the more unique of its kind. Making use of a skateboard-like platform, you could control the movements of your character with a simple turn or tilt of the platform. The gameplay was meant to look and feel as cool as possible, putting focus on the amount of tricks you do and trying to reach the highest score possible. The ramps, rails, and level designs were built for a fantasy-driven experience, with some of the tricks being so far-fetched they decided to animate them by hand rather than using motion capture. But its over-the-top nature is honestly what made it so great. It was ambitious and didn't take itself too seriously. I just wish I could find a working Top Skater machine near me, so I could get to experience it all over again. But there's one arcade sensation that actually can be enjoyed at home, and is still very prominent in arcades of present day. So for the sake of all that is sacred in arcade history, I present to you all the king of rhythm-based gaming, Dance Dance Revolution. The very first DDR game was released into the arcades on November 18th, 1998. Being marketed as the first ever dance simulation game, DDR was aiming to be both stimulating and physically hands-on for its players. This was the first time a game could be considered an exercise, and given the fact that a good friend of mine had shed over 50 pounds playing this, I can attest to how intense it can be. The game provides a nice variety of difficulty settings, allowing you to slowly ease yourself into its otherwise frantic gameplay. Now when it comes to skill gaps, this game can really turn things up a notch, as the switch from light to standard difficulty will quickly show you how real this can get. But for those that have dipped their toes into DDR's lengthy catalog, you already know how rewarding it can be to achieve a high rank on your favorite song. This series single-handedly introduced me to some of my favorite songs ever, and my taste for late 90s trance will always have DDR to thank for showing me so many wonderful songs. It's one of those few arcade machines that is destined to make a player of any skill level giddy with joy and excitement. Whether you're clumsily trudging through your first song as a beginner, playing alongside a friend, or showing out for an audience with your best moves, DDR is one of the few arcade titles that can make the entire arcade come together and just revel in the joy of gaming. It's upbeat, stylish as hell, and best of all, just a damn good time. It's no wonder why I still find myself pulling out the old DDR dance mat every few weeks or so, in order to sharpen my skills for that fateful day I hit the arcade and get ready to bust a move for anyone willing to watch me. It's franchises like these that really go the distance, and I'd be nothing less than moronic to not give this series the flowers that it deserves. But long story short, of all that we discussed in the realms of arcade gaming, all these genres were just another addition to what made this hobby such an incredible experience. It was both competitive and endearing, bringing people of all walks of life together in order to share a mutual love for the sport of what made these games so memorable. It's one of those you just had to be there type of things. I mean, comparing the arcade experience now to what it was back then honestly makes me a bit depressed. I mean, gaming was just a lot more social back in those days, and that's what truly made these arcades such an important place for those that grew up in them. and having a safe space to meet friends, enjoy some games, and just let loose is something this world could definitely use more of. So on that note, I thought we would segue this video into a discussion of some of the most beloved arcades that are no longer with us. And while that list is consistently growing with every passing day, I decided to break it down into 3 of the most interesting I could find, with one of them being a place I've actually been to. So why don't we start there, with this one question: what happened to Disney Quest? Being a self-proclaimed Florida man and current resident of the Sunshine State, I've had my fair share of Disney-related antics. And before I'd ever moved to this glorious dump of a state with its obscene lack of turn signals and common sense, my family and I used to vacation to Orlando and stay at one of the many movie-themed resorts in Disney World. Now this was back in the late 90s and early 2000s, when in my opinion, the aesthetic of Disney's downtown portion was at its peak. The bright lights, futuristic design, and overall vibe of the town's layout was incredibly charming. And if there's any visual memory that has burned itself into my brain from those bygone days, it was the sight of this magical building, right here. Disney Quest, a 5-story entertainment center, packed to the gills with state-of-the-art VR systems, classic arcade games, and choice eateries. I was absolutely enamored at the sight of this, and luckily enough, I was able to experience it. First off, just take a look at the interior. The architecture alone was enough to warrant some serious curiosity, and I can't stress enough how unbelievably cool this place was. And as a kid that came from playing Tekken 3 in a small town pizza parlor to now this, I was overwhelmed with excitement to say the least. But upon further inspection and from what I can recall of my experience, beauty was only skin deep. You see, the whole selling point of Disney Quest was in its state-of-the-art VR games. Like for example, they had this one virtual roller coaster, in which you would strap yourself into what looked like a Saiyan pod from Dragon Ball Z, and it had a screen. You could design the motions of your coaster and then the pod would close, in which it would then proceed to start doing flips and spins to replicate what is happening on your screen. And if you ask me, I'd hate to see what it'd be like if someone blew chunks in that thing. They also had this virtual sword fighting game called Ride the Comics. You would strap on this massive clunker of a VR headset and hold what looked to be a shake weight, at which you would then proceed to flail it around at various comic book themed villains in a dystopian setting, which looking back was a kinda cool concept. We were sat in these spaceship looking things, but I can only imagine how hilarious this had to look to the employees. But either way, to experience technology like this in the late 90s was nothing short of incredible. But that's only a couple of examples, and like I said, this place was 5 stories, so there was a lot to see and do. While a lot of the ideas behind the games or rides were showcasing the potential of VR, they also had a pretty impressive setup for some regular arcade cabinets. They had 2 separate sections, either the classic area, being dedicated to a plethora of 80s games such as Cubert or Pinball, or the underground arcade, which was more of a Dave & Buster's type of vibe with a variety of racers, ticket, and other modern games of the late 90s. From what I can remember, as well as research, they didn't seem to carry any violent games or light gun shooters, which was a real bummer. But all the games were set on a free play mode, so with admission, you could just play as much as you liked. I think what made this place so special overall was the fact that it was truly a product of its era. You guys know how much I love the aesthetic of the late 90s and early 2000s. And Disney Quest was truly the love child of all those ideas in visual form. It was hopeful, futuristic, and just had a great overall atmosphere. But given the fact that not much of anything was ever updated in the almost 20 years that it was open, it's pretty easy to spot where they went wrong. I mean, a lot of these virtual reality experiences were super cool at the time that it first opened, but if they weren't willing to progress with the ever-advancing world of technology, their once great tech quickly became obsolete, along with their business model. While the original Disney Quest concept was slated to be worldwide, the Chicago location closed only 2 years after opening, and the one in downtown Disney eventually being shuttered in 2017. It's truly a shame to think of what could have been for Disney Quest if they had been willing to adapt and update their games a bit more. I understand that it probably wasn't anywhere near as profitable as they were hoping, but to waste such beautiful and nostalgic architecture truly hurts me to my core. But I do take comfort in the fact that I got to experience it while it was open. And if any of you guys did as well, please let me know in the comments. I also heard they had some kind of alien encounter on the top floor, but I was too scared to ever find out for myself. But we've got some more locations to cover, and this next one has been on my list for quite some time. So let's hop on a plane and head on over to the sun-ridden streets of San Fran in a retrospective visit of the Metrion. While we've covered a lot of ground on the topic of arcades, it wouldn't be a heaven-sent video if I didn't take some time and discuss one of my favorite companies of the 90s, that being Sony. Now this is a company that was well known for releasing quality products, from home audio equipment, the infamous line of Trinitron CRTs, and of course, the PlayStation. Sony was really showing out at this time, with their impressive line of products and state-of-the-art technology, so much so that they essentially became the gold standard for all things tech-related. So with their company on such an undeniable hot streak, they thought, what the hell, let's open a shopping mall. So with 350,000 square feet of space, 4 floors, and a running imagination, the Sony Metrion was officially opened on June 16th, 1999. And man, was it a beautiful specimen. This urban entertainment center, as Sony explained it, was designed to be the mall of the future, making use of metallic finishes, sleek glass panels, and plenty of futuristic flair. This place was the epitome of Y2K aesthetic, and the anemoia I feel for never getting to experience it truly haunts me. Simply put, it was inspired by everything that made this era so cool, but I promise, there's a lot more to this place than its looks. Since it was built on the premise of entertainment rather than shopping, there were a lot of different attractions to explore, from an IMAX movie theater, play areas and restaurants, to multiple shops and storefronts. But most importantly, the reason we're even here is because of its unique arcade, as well as the one and only PlayStation Store. Beginning with the arcade though, which was themed after a comic strip called The Airtight Garage, it had this very unique mix of both steam and cyberpunk elements, and was stated to be more of a VR showcase than your typical arcade. One of the most popular games being Hyper Bowl, which was essentially a game of Wii bowling that was played throughout the streets of San Francisco. There were also these little pods and other various oddities that could be spotted throughout the arcade, almost making it feel more like a theme park attraction than a place to play games. But that's not to say it wasn't incredibly sick, it just wasn't your typical run-of-the-mill arcade setup. But much like the majority of businesses in the Metrion, the Airtight Garage only lasted a couple of years, later being turned into a tilt arcade, in which it then took on a more standard format. Either way, I would have been happy to have gotten to see either of these places in the Metrion's prime, but not any more than I wish I could have seen this beautiful place right here. The one and only PlayStation Store. This place was by far their most beloved attraction, being a hub for all things PlayStation. It featured this really cool bar setup with a bunch of consoles, and employees working behind the bar known as game tenders would let you pick out games that you wanted to sample or of course buy, as well as a litany of other products that were available for the consoles at that time. It was a great place to meet friends and just play games, and they also made a habit of hosting some rather iconic events, such as the midnight launch of the PS2, an MGS4 signing event with Hideo Kojima, and other various events pertaining to future consoles or big name releases. One of the most memorable though, being the PS3 launch, in which a security detail led a truck full of supposed PS3s to an intersection outside the store. Then Sony's executive Jack Tretton proceeded to unload and unbox the very first PS3 right in front of everyone, which was quite the spectacle for such an event. They also added the Walk of Game, an honor that was reserved for celebrating the milestones of gaming icons in both the actual and virtual world. But despite the success of Sony as a company, the Metrion itself was a sinking ship. The complex found itself facing a trend of store closings, with many of its tenants failing to turn a profit. With the number of tenants on a steady decline, Sony decided to turn the complex over to Westfield Properties, leading to the eventual closing of pretty much everything we talked about before, and a massive Target being built in the place of its previous ventures. This is a story that honestly pains me to talk about, as I really wish I could have gotten to experience it before things changed. Just looking back at the many pictures and footage from that time, it really was an ambitious effort on Sony's part. It was also coming at a time when the future felt so bright and hopeful, when technology seemed to enhance our lives rather than dumb things down, and architecture such as this just doesn't seem to exist these days. It's a shame to see such a cool concept go to waste, but at least it was there for me to experience at its prime. If you have any memories from the early days of the Metrion, please let me know what it was like, especially if you had gotten a chance to see the PlayStation Store. But before we go, we've still got one last arcade to uncover, and for this one, we're gonna be heading overseas. So if you've yet to have enough of that oh so delicious early 2000s aesthetic, I'm here to show you one of the coolest I've ever laid eyes on. So let's catch a flight to the dreary skies of London, England, at the infamous Trocadero Center. For the final topic of this video, I thought we'd end things off with one of the more obscure selections I had come across. Now, London is well known for its historical architecture. You've got Big Ben, Westminster Abbey, and St. Bride's Church, just to name a few. So to see a historic building such as this really isn't all too rare in the city of London. But when you see the neon wonderland that used to reside in this beautiful complex, your jaw is sure to hit the floor. First opening in 1896 as a restaurant, the Trocadero had eventually come to find itself being redeveloped as a tourist-oriented leisure space. Boasting plenty of shopping fanfare and a brand new Cineplex, it was the largest entertainment building in the UK at its time. Retaining its original Baroque aesthetic, they opted to completely renovate the interior to match the energy of a new generation. And with newfound sponsors from brands such as Sega, they decided to capitalize on the future of gaming and swiftly launched Sega World of London. And with a slogan like, "Try telling your brain it's not real," you can only imagine the surreal design of this fabled arcade. Boasting over 110,000 square feet of space and becoming the largest indoor theme park in the world at that time, it had over 7 floors to navigate and an insane variety of attractions. So what could have possibly went wrong? Well, as you can imagine, an idea this ambitious comes at great risk, and to fill an entire historical building with the likes of just an arcade may not have been the smartest choice. Aesthetically, its patrons couldn't be more enthralled, with its neon-wrapped escalator being a major talking point to anyone that stepped foot through its digital wonderland. There was a massive statue of Sonic the Hedgehog welcoming patrons, and the entire building itself felt like you were living in some kind of video game. Where they primarily went wrong though, other than being far too large, was the fact that all of the games were on a free play mode. And while the overpriced entry fee was certainly damaging the Sega World's business model, the return on the hundreds, even thousands of different cabinets were well into the negative. Not to mention, even with arcades being as popular as they were at this time, it just seemed as though Sega World was more of a visual spectacle than anything. When you're filling a place this large with millions of dollars worth of arcade cabinets, VR technology, and not to mention an insane light bill, you're gonna need your patrons to do a lot more than just show up and hang out. Safe to say, this gorgeous concept was doomed from the start, and the Trocadero Segaland had swiftly closed its doors a mere 3 years after opening. It's always fun to imagine that a place like this would stick around forever, but I can definitely understand from a business perspective where things had went wrong. Despite everything, it's still a cool piece of gaming history, and will forever live on in the memories of those that were there to experience it. But just as all good things must end, so must this video, and I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to spend it with me. And let this be a lesson to cherish the arcades we still have in present day, because tomorrow is never promised, especially in the world of gaming. I hope you all enjoyed this video though, and please drop a comment down below on what your favorite arcade or arcade game is. I'd love to know. But until next time, my name is Vincent. Take care all, and I hope to see you guys in the next video. Stay safe and stay blessed. Peace out, guys.